But we heard our presentation from Am Rosen and Dr. Dean Lloyd, and at this point we're going to reverse gears and head down south to the great state of Texas. We're going to bring in our friend Lark from Texas. And you are live now, Lark.
Well, thank you there, Gary. I am pleased to be here today. You know that I speak to words, to language, and to communitarianism. I'm reminded not to buy, not to comply, and to ask why. We all are today. And I've asked you to refer to my research notes at a website entitled Just an American. The website is larkintexas.blogspot.com. And I've suggested that you begin with an entry entitled The Sum of All Things, which is a series. 5 parts so far. Because the sum of all things is the truth. Arrival at truth is many-layered because it requires the lifting of veils. It requires quietude and introspection. Today men speak of evolution, revolution, even devolution. Yet too few speak of involution, looking inside oneself or turning inward, that they may look before they leap. Now this is a quote of my own. You know that I'm fond of quotes. Last month, just to recap, we spoke briefly to communitarianism. I indicated that that entry, entitled The Sum of All Things, is a listing of ideologies and or schools of thought which lend toward that all-encompassing ism known as communitarianism. I reminded you that communitarians are left politically and they are right politically. They are center politically. This is a word that was coined by the same person who coined the word communism and communalism. John Barnby, early 1840s. This was a word that was used in an address before the Royal Society by Mohandas Gandhi during World War II. The word has been around. And for whatever it's worth, I think it is a word that all of us should become more familiar with. I myself discovered this word the first time I ever got on a computer, within the first 2 weeks. Perchance, I suspect. But as soon as I discovered the word, I thought, well, I've never heard this word before. Communitarianism. Difficult word to say. I had to say this word over and over in my mind before I could say it comfortably. And then I did some word searches on the internet. For me, the internet, the computer, is really nothing more than a library and a fancy typewriter. Today it's also a speaker. It provides an outlet so that you and I may speak together. But I signed up for something called Google Alerts, and I wanted to find out every time this word communitarian or communitarianism was employed, in the popular press, within academia, wherever it was employed, because I wanted to understand how people thought of this word. And then I discovered a website entitled Living Outside the Dialectic. This is a website that is run by a woman and her daughter, her adult daughter, who had written a book entitled The Anti-Communitarian Manifesto. And this struck me because these seemed to be the only people that were speaking against this funny word, communitarianism. Because everything else that I was reading was in support of this thing called communitarianism. And I was astonished, because it was an embrace of both capitalism, which I didn't much like, and communism, which I also didn't much like. And so I had to get to the bottom of this, and I was, of course, chagrined, often astonished, that more folks were not speaking this word, saying it out loud. Last month, I shared with you a passage from sociologist Charles Wright Mills from Middle Classes, or forgive me, from White Collar, subtitled The American Middle Classes. Now, this is a man who at one time fancied himself a communist, but he became disillusioned. He was from Waco, Texas. His father was an insurance executive. Waco and Dallas, Texas are at the center of Freemasonry in Texas. And I was very curious about this man. He's very bright. He rode a motorcycle, probably like his hero Marlon Brando. He was a regular American. But I wanted to demonstrate by reading that passage last month how easily we could be indeed socially engineered and socialized. How we become enslaved by the marketing mentality. How we can become enslaved by authoritarianism, authoritarian constructs. I also shared with you a wonderful quote from Master Chang, or Shuangzi, a man regarded as the earliest advocate for anarchism. You can find that quote at my website under an entry entitled Word Clouds, or War Clouds. I shared with you something entitled Anatomy of Slave Speak. Also, a website named after a philosopher named Fries, or Fries, I-A-N, or Friesian.com. The essay entitled Rights, Responsibilities, and Communitarianism. And of course, a couple of wonderful quotes from Mark Twain. The first, from Osteopathy, is at that very same essay, Rights, Responsibilities, and Communitarianism. An essay I highly recommended, if you recall. I made mention of also cornpone opinions. Tell me where a man gets his cornpone, and I'll tell you about his opinions. Also from Mark Twain. Now, hopefully, if I don't get lost, we're going to quickly go through this ism list, so I can at least get it on record. But I am remarkably absent-minded and imperfect. And try as I might, you may have to do some of this research on your own if you find it of interest or of value. Now, there was a time when I went to a website called oppositeword.com, opposite-word.com, because as enamored as I was with words, I also recognized that they could be, and often were, the bane of my existence. These signs and symbols, which are the substance of our thoughts, they drive our actions. And remember, you've heard me say, you are not what you think. You're not what you say. But you are what you do. So, a few years ago, I looked up word because I wanted to know its opposite, its antonym. At that time, the opposite of the word word was pleasant. Pleasant. But in the last year or so, according to this last year or so, I'm getting a bit of echo, Gary. The opposite of the word word was silence. And so that's how I live my life today. Very often in silence. It pleases me. I also mentioned a quote from a Russian writer, early part of the 20th century, named Yevgeny Zamyatin, who wrote a book, a science fiction novel, entitled We, in 1921, and I suggested that it may be worth your while to look at this thing called we and recognize where it came from. Who was he inspired by, this writer? Which writers were inspired by him? It may surprise you. There's a whole long line of writers and thinkers inspired by this one novel entitled We. But I also mentioned a quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the famous Russian writer of the Gulag Archipelago. What did he say? But the first step of the courageous individual is not to take part in the lie or the we. One word of truth outweighs the world. Fascinating. Now, I mentioned that communitarianism was the synthesis of two words or two ideologies, one capitalism, one communism. But it is also corporatism. It is also British mercantilism, what we call free trade. In my view, communitarianism is simply a variant of socialism. It is characterized by intense central planning and hierarchical, top-down, even pyramidal control of a people, of a population. It's a way to organize society. Now we understand or at least I submit, that socialism equals gangsterism equals slavery. These three things are interconnected. Once you have one, you have all three. They're inseparable. Gangsterism, what is that? It is racketeering. It's organized crime. Crony capitalism. Crony monopoly capitalism is the same as communism, really. The USA has been a socialist nation from its very beginning. I mentioned previously that in 1871 was its last iteration as a corporatist state, with the passage of the Act of 1871 during the Reconstruction period following the war between the states, which I also liken to a communist revolution, as have other writers. One article that you can read online is entitled The Lincoln Push, P-U-T-S-C-H. The Lincoln Push, America's Bolshevik Revolution. Start your research there. So what did they set up? They set up an all-cap United States to supplant an organic constitution, which itself was a fraud upon the people, as was the Declaration of Independence a fraud upon the American people. Thomas Jefferson, its principal writer, spoke to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That thing called pursuit of happiness was a Rosicrucian term of art. This at a time when Lockean precepts were in vogue, such as life, liberty, and property. And what is it that Karl Marx said in his book, The Communist Manifesto, 1848, Chapter 2? In a nutshell, to paraphrase him, he said that communism was the abolition of all property rights. What is property? Do you not own your own body? Who else will be responsible for your body if not you? How about your mind? Is your mind separate from your body? I don't think so. Property starts there. It starts here. The words that will have the most meaning to you are those words which are written on the heart. Those words written on the heart are those that you will have and you will hold forever. I had to learn to love myself before I could learn to love anyone else. This is something that's important for all of us. Under communism, under socialism, there was the intelligentsia, the nomenclatura, the bourgeoisie, and the proletariat. They spoke of a socialist utopia called the dictatorship of the proletariat. But today, with communitarianism, we have a scientific dictatorship of the globalized community. The nomenclatura are the apparatchiks, the well-educated. The bourgeoisie are the targets. The bourgeoisie would be the middle class. This is what has been orchestrated upon all of us. With the elimination of the bourgeoisie to be reduced to penury, to peonage. For all of us to be reduced as a people to a nation of beggars and squatters with no property rights, land, stuff, your body, your mind. We return to neo-feudalism, neo-colonialism, to serfdom, and to bondage, contract bondage. So I may not have time to get through this list of isms today, but I thought I'd provide for you a new word to examine. And this word is pronounced engrenage. It is spelled E as in Edward, N as in Nancy, G, R, E, N as in Nancy, A-G-E, engrenage. At my research notes page, invisible serf's collar, collar like a shirt or a dress. Read about engrenage, gearing, the inevitability of events. Imagine the windings of a Swiss watch. What is your role? Are you a part of this organized crime, which is rife in our society? Because socialism is a system of arrested development. It is human, child, sex, drug, organ trafficking, parasitism, freeloading. But overarchingly, it is a system of thwarted or arrested development of the individual. It is quite an inhumane system of governance. Instead of self-governance, now you and me are to be ruled by others who are deemed more scientific, better prepared. And let's be reminded of Earl Shorross in A Nation of Salesmen, 1996. It was indeed the age of information. Remember, the industrial age is now the information age. But information was not the precursor to knowledge. It was the tool of the salesman. Are you a salesman? Are you the auteur, the artiste, who claims authorship of your life? Let's be reminded what Julian Benda said in The Treason of the Intellectuals, 1927. Our age has seen priests of the mind teaching that gregarious is the praiseworthy form of thought, and that independent thought is contemptible. It is moreover certain that the group which desires to be strong has no use for a man who claims to think for himself. Communitarianism is evident all around us. It is here. It is now. Under communitarian law, there is such a thing called quality of life. Look it up. It is not well-being. It is a product sold to you. Look up responsibility to protect, R2P. These are communitarian doctrines under communitarian law. It is socialism. It is racketeering, organized crime, gangsterism. It can only lead to slavery, ladies and gentlemen.
And Lark, on that note, I gotta give you the nudge. It's that time. But before I blow you out of here and bring in my next presenter, I want to make sure you get a quick opportunity to do a little bit of blatant self-promotion. Tell folks where they can find more of your material.
Well, you can find my stuff at website online, Lark, in Texas. larkintexas.blogspot.com. The name of the research site is called simply Just an American, but it's not spelled like you think it's spelled. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Lark, always a pleasure. Any chance I can twist your arm into being part of our roundtable this evening?
Well, I think I might be able to do that if I'm not chased out.
All right, sir. You have a good evening, and I'm going to take us out with a little music. Thank you so much.